All right, welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really thought-provoking, kind of somber framework from a text that takes a hard, intellectual look at our modern cultural shifts. The author calls this a genealogy of bad ideas. It's basically a fascinating attempt to understand why our society today feels, to them at least, like a ship adrift in a completely dark sea. We're going to explore the author's core conflict between objective truth and subjective desire, and we'll map out exactly how historical concepts have built upon one another to create the cultural moment we're living in right now. Okay, let's dive right into this.
So look at this anonymous quote. It really sets the entire foundational premise for the author's argument. It highlights this massive divergence in how we approach the world. Philosophy is framed here as seeking objective truth, whereas ideology is framed as an attempt to bend the truth, to fit subjective desires. Keep this distinction in mind, kind of keep it in your back pocket, because it is the exact lens through which the author views all of modern history.
And here is our roadmap for today. 1. The drift. 2. Philosophy versus ideology. 3. A genealogy of ideas. 4. Masculine versus feminine error. 5. The tangible shipwreck. And we'll wrap up with 6. Recognize, resist, restore.
Starting off with Section 1, The Drift, Abandoning Truth. The author actually starts by capturing the feeling of our current era, using this really powerful nautical metaphor. Imagine a ship that has literally lost its anchor in reality's harbor and is just drifting out into the open, treacherous sea. Historically, the author argues, society relied on unmovable guiding stars, right? An objective truth that anchored us. But over time, we traded that fixed anchor for a fickle compass. The text actually explicitly compares modern culture to Jack Sparrow's magical compass from Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, the one that doesn't point to a fixed north, it just points to whatever your ever-changing desires want in that exact moment. And the author suggests that today, society's steering entirely by this subjective compass. Which brings us to the central question of the text. What actually happens when an entire society prefers its own feelings and ideologies over objective truth? What are the real-world consequences when we collectively decide to bend reality to fit our desires instead of doing the really hard work of aligning our desires to fit reality? The author uses this question to investigate why ideas that were once considered totally fringe are now the dominant forces shaping our world.
Moving into Section 2, Philosophy versus Ideology, the battleground of modern thought. Let's look at how the author rigorously defines these terms. First up, we have philosophy. And the author views philosophy not just as some dry academic study, but as an act of profound humility. It's defined here as the willingness to reform our own desires and ideas to match what is objectively true. It basically means anchoring ourselves to realities that exist completely outside of our own feelings.
But then, contrast that with ideology. In this framework, ideology is the exact opposite of humility. It's the attempt to reshape objective reality into a mere reflection of personal wants. The author argues that this ideological approach is the absolute root of our modern disorientation. We aren't trying to discover the truth anymore, we're trying to invent it. All right, Section 3. A genealogy of ideas, how concepts build upon each other. So you might be wondering, how did we get from a society grounded in philosophy to one adrift in ideology? Well, the author argues that massive cultural shifts evolve sequentially, kind of like technological progress. You absolutely need a preceding idea, like the discovery of electricity, before you can achieve a consequent idea, like inventing the light bulb. And only then can you reach complex applications, like turning sci-fi concepts into actual working AI. And the author traces this genealogy across a tripartite timeline. Back in the past, we see foundational thinkers challenging traditional beliefs, often manipulating or entirely abandoning their Christendom backgrounds to do it. Then, moving into the mid-20th century, those foundational concepts end up fueling movements that radically reshape gender and morality. Finally, in the present day, we're facing the final cultural consequences. We're essentially living amid the complex applications of those initial preceding ideas. Which brings us to Section 4, Masculine versus Feminine Error, the Forms of Ideological Corruption. Now, before diving into specific historical figures, the author makes a highly specific distinction regarding how these untethered bad ideas manifest differently between the sexes. Masculine error is characterized as the hammer, while feminine error is described as the rewiring. Now, the author is careful to caveat that there is overlap here, right? These are general patterns rather than absolute, hard and fast rules. But they use this framework to explain the different flavors of ideological corruption we see playing out in society. When men's ideas become untethered from truth, The source argues the results are extremely overt and forceful. Men tend to externalize the chaos. They build ideologies focused on domination and control, which, as we know, often lead to violent revolution and tyranny. The author notes that masculine error leaves a highly visible trail of destruction. We're talking ruins, bodies, and wrecked nations. It quite literally swings the hammer. On the other hand, we have the author's view of feminine error. This is seen as much more covert. It's subtle. Instead of externalizing chaos, the text argues that feminine error internalizes and relationally distributes it. This involves emotional manipulation and ideological subversion. The author posits that this error often presents itself as compassion and care, but actually works to fracture families and distort identities, ultimately creating a cultural script of perpetual victimhood. So while masculine error blows holes in the ship's hull, feminine error is quietly dismantling the compass.
Section 5. The tangible shipwreck, the real-world consequences.
Moving from the broad theories to the tangible wreckage, let's look at the real-world consequences today. 54%. That is the rather alarming figure the author highlights regarding soaring divorce rates. For the author, this isn't just a number on a page. It's statistical evidence that our ideological drift is actively eroding foundational societal institutions like the family. To put that into perspective, we see this dramatic decline in household marriage rates cited in the text. It drops from nearly 79% of households, including a married couple, back in 1949, all the way down to roughly 47% today. The author uses this data to argue that the cultural house is actively being wrecked by our absolute preference for subjective ideology over objective truth. Furthermore, the author points to the modern blurring of biological sex. The text argues that realities that were once clearly defined and universally understood are now being blurred simply to match subjective feelings. According to the source, this shift is resulting in dramatic, fatal, and totally irreversible consequences for many of today's youth. The author really presents this as the ultimate tragic consequence of a society trying to bend reality rather than aligning with it.
Finally, Section 6, Recognize, Resist, Restore, a call to action.
So, what does this all mean for us? What's the author's ultimate goal here? Well, the goal isn't just to complain about the state of the world. The author actually wants readers to actively trace the origins of these ideas to make sense of the subliminal influences that are affecting all of us. By really understanding this historical drift, the author hopes you can form your own conclusions, navigate these modern cultural waves with your eyes wide open, and ultimately aim toward a better tomorrow.
The final plea of the text is incredibly clear. We need to stop looking at the fickle compass. We must abandon the ever-changing compass of subjective desire, look back up, and find the unmovable, true northern stars of absolute truth. Which leaves us with this pretty powerful, provocative thought from the author's framework. As we navigate this dark sea of modernity, are you steering by the fixed stars of truth, or are you drifting on the fickle currents of your own desires? It's a profound question that really challenges us to examine our own philosophical foundations. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. It's been a fascinating look at how deeply ideas shape our reality, and I hope it leaves you eager to explore the rest of this complex genealogical series. Keep seeking the truth, and I'll see you next time.